I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Thank you so much for taking the time to
Pleasure.
speak with us.
Pleasure.
Maybe if people aren't already familiar with your film, how would you introduce or give a brief synopsis of The Racer?
Okay, so The Racer is a movie, it's a period movie set in 1998. And it's really a character study about a domestique, which is a support rider, who is reaching kind of the end of the road of his career and really doesn't know where to go next. And it's set, the backdrop for the film is the 1998 Tour de France. The first three stages, unusually, were set in Ireland. And the reason for that was apparently the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup, was happening in France that year, and they thought there was going to be a collision between, you know, the World Cup final, and which France actually ended up winning. So between that and the Tour de France in Paris, and they just thought, we can't handle that. So there was an opportunity to farm it out. It was the first time it left mainland Europe in the history of the tour. So it was pretty good for Ireland to get it, because the eyes of the world are on a country, and you get to see a lot of the beautiful things in Ireland all over the world. So they snapped up the opportunity for this, and but it's really just about the first three stages of the tour, and really it's an examination of what it's like to be a behind the scenes look at what it's like to be a domestique, a support rider, not necessarily a champion. And what fascinated me really about these guys is they're quite happy to play second fiddle. They're quite happy to support the champion, you know, the sprinters, and not really get any glory themselves. The only kind of like glory or pat on the back they get is from their own teammates, or within the actual tour they'd be respected. But other than that, you know, it's a kind of a thankless task. You know, nobody knows who the domestiques are in the world of cycling. Really, everybody knows who wears the yellow jersey, and that fascinates me, that somebody would sacrifice their lives for this.
And so, because obviously it's set against that backdrop of, you know, that was the real circumstances of that particular Tour de France. But what made you decide to want to make a film about it now, and you kind of, you know, have this fictional narrative set in that context? I mean, I guess all the stuff that's happened since the Lance Armstrong, you know, sort of scandal reveal, and there's multiple documentaries, you know, floating around at the moment. So was it kind of tied in with that, or was your interest kind of separate to that?
Well, I mean, you know, actually, the cycling, I wasn't fascinated necessarily with cycling until I started to research into cycling and find out about these domestiques. But you're right, it was a kind of it was probably the nadir of the Tour de France. In fact, they thought at one stage that it was going to be the last tour, the 1998 tour, because of all the scandals of the drugs and the Festina bust, and the cyclists went on strike at one stage because they were being tested so often, which kind of shows you that they had something to hide, to be honest. I mean, really, there was an awful lot of drugs in sport, in this particular sport back then. And I'd like to think it's been cleaned up quite a lot. However, at the end of the tour, at the end of that tour, the Tour de France organizers decided they were going to do their best to get rid of the drugs out of the sport altogether, and put like lots of structures in place and lots of testing, and had a blood passport, lots of different things. And Lance Armstrong won the next 7 Tour de France's. So think about that. It's kind of, now I think it has, you know, there's levels of drugs that you were allowed to take that are now illegal. There's an amount of EPO at the time. You were allowed to take a certain amount of EPO as long as your hematocrit level didn't go above 50%. In other words, your red blood cells didn't go above 50%. But now all of that's stamped out. But at the time, there was levels, you know, so things have changed. And there's always been stimulants in cycling. Right back from like 100 years ago, they would drink brandy, or they would drink whiskey, or whatever. They drink whatever they could get their hands on to ease the pain. It's all about the pain, easing the pain. And obviously there's that very famous British cyclist, Tommy Simpson, who died from a speed overdose on, I think it was Mont Ventoux. His bike was, he fell off his bike at the side of the road, and he kind of kept cycling like this and died, had a heart attack. So there's been a lot of drugs in the sport, and I think what interested me also about that time was how cavalier people were about the drugs. Like the crime wasn't taking the drugs, the crime was getting caught. And that's quite interesting.
Mm. And in doing your research, I mean, I think what's great about the film is you sort of balance the narrative with also, you know, really showing quite a lot of the detail of kind of the drugs and, you know, the physical things that these cyclists put themselves through. Were you shocked in your research of kind of understanding just what lengths they go to, and why was it important to you to kind of really get up close to that in your film?
I think what's always fascinating about sports people is the extent they will punish themselves to get to where they want to go. And I think cycling, and particularly road cycling, like and events like the Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia or the Vuelta in Spain, those long 3-week rides at approximately 200 kilometers a day, up and down mountains and along straights. It's probably arguably the hardest sport in the world. I mean, I can't think of anything I would hate more than have to compete in the Tour de France. I mean, I wouldn't manage to get one stage done, to be honest, you know. It's just extreme. It's the most extreme sport, I believe. And so you've got that, and then you've got what these guys will push themselves and push their bodies to the detriment of their health. And I think that's it's almost like they've got like they've diced with death. Motor racing has probably got a similar kind of dice with death kind of thing about it. And that was kind of explored in Ron Howard's film Rush, which I looked at for this film because that was again a behind the scenes of motor racing, and it showed their domestic lives and then their competition with each other, and also managed to seem to put you in the driving seat. And that's what, when you talk about getting up close and personal, that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to sort of try and make it feel like you got to experience what it was like to ride on one of those stages. I mean, we can all turn on the TV and we can watch the beautiful coverage of the Tour de France or any of the big races, and it looks fantastic, but you never really get to see the dirt and the dirt under their fingernails, or the sweat running down their backs, or the pain they go through. You know, it's just, it's beautiful landscapes and lots of sexy looking guys on bikes.
And do you think in that way it kind of brings into contrast, doesn't it, kind of like the glamour and, you know, these incredible physiques that these men have, and then behind the scenes, and like you say, it's really, you know, not glamorous at all. And do you think perhaps that's also how people felt when they did find out about, you know, what was going on with Lance Armstrong and how pervasive this was in the sport? Did it somehow take away from our feeling of these sports people as heroes, as gods, if you like?
I think it did. I mean, I remember distinctly when the tour came to Ireland in 1998. I'd just moved back I was living in London for a long time. I just moved back from London, and I found a note on my car outside my apartment, which told me I couldn't park there any longer because for the next 5 days, because the Tour de France was coming to town. And I thought, wow, that's a good reason to move your car. And I got quite excited about it. And because the word about the Tour de France then was like, you know, it was this like sophisticated, cool, sexy sport full of, as you say, athletic young men who are, you know, really kind of pushing themselves to the limit. And it just had a very glamorous kind of feel about it, perhaps because it was Tour de France, you know what I mean? It's the French kind of glamour. But when research was done by us and reading books and looking at documentaries years later, scratch the surface and you realize that, you find out that it's basically a lot, you know, a bunch of working class guys holed up in cheap hotel rooms, taking copious amounts of performance enhancing drugs. So the gloss was definitely taken off it, and continued to be taken off. I mean, the mad thing was that even though that was the worst tour, it was called the Tour de Dopage, or the Tour of Shame, it was known, that particular tour. And you thought they were going to get rid of it, but for the next 7 years, Lance won it, you know? So they didn't really, I think they're always a step ahead, these guys are always a step ahead. Now, I'd like to believe that there's little or no drugs in it, but, you know, they're still very fast. They're faster and faster, and doing incredible feats. So maybe the bodies are changing and adapting, but or the training mechanisms are better. But you know, you always got to sort of suspect that there is some help there.
And talk to me about your cast. I mean, in particular, Louis Talpe as your protagonist. I mean, he seems to carry the role incredibly well, from the sort of the physical aspects right through to kind of showing that kind of underbelly of vulnerability that he has. So, you know, how did you land on this cast, and how did you particularly work with Louis?
Well, I'm glad you appreciated him, because he certainly did put the work in. Louis is I got lucky with Louis, right? Louis is an actor from Belgium, but he also happens to be a sports fanatic, and particularly cycling. So the two of these things came together. I couldn't believe my luck, you know. He managed to lose a lot of weight and a lot of body fat for the actual role, but he was in pretty good shape before that anyway. He does Ironman, and he does an awful lot of sporting activities, but like, I mean, extreme sports stuff, you know. And he also happens to be an actor, so I couldn't have been better for me. I had never heard of him. I was put in contact with him by our Belgian producers, because it was a Belgian Luxembourg Irish co-production. And as soon as I met him and spoke to him, like, he could talk about cycling all day long. And actually, what was brilliant about it was he took on kind of the role of it within the cast. He actually took on the role that he played in the film. We had a boot camp that lasted for about 10 days before we started to shoot, where we tried to get them, to the actors and some cyclists who were extras, to be comfortable with cycling close together in a pack. That was the thing. They were mostly, the actors were worried about, that people get too close to them, and then one wheel would tip against another wheel and boom, they'd be off, like, you know. But he became their leader, really, you know, and looked after them like a herd of sheep, you know. And by the end of the 10 days, they were happy enough riding together. So he was really, really valuable in many, many ways. And he has a face that I just, you know, as soon as I looked at him, I just kind of felt sorry for him, you know. I don't mean that in a patronizing way, but he has a very sympathetic face, you know, and he's a beautiful smile. So he ticked a lot of boxes, you know. But it was for him, he's often said it was the role of a lifetime, you know.
And in terms of kind of some of the themes that come out of it, obviously, like, you know, I think somebody's already discussed about kind of people who are in this position in the sport, but I think there's some broader themes there as well, of kind of, you know, our concepts and of masculinity and these ideals that people push themselves to, also kind of approaching middle age, if you like. You know, his identity is so wrapped up in him being a cyclist that he's, you know, he thinks he's nothing without his bike. So, you know, was that something else that you wanted to bring out through the film?
Yeah, where I kind of identified with that, Sarah, more than anything, was I identified with guys like domestiques, really, or cyclists, professional cyclists. I compare them kind of like to film directors, because you make a film, and a film will take up arguably a year of your life. Now, there'll be 3 months, which will be preparing to shoot and shooting, and then there'll be a long post-production period. And you'll take a long time to get to that period. And you'll be thrown in with a bunch of people that you don't really know, and you'll have to get to know pretty quickly. And you might be all staying in the same hotel, or you might be all, you know, you'll all meet on a location, and every day you have to deal with these people that you've never dealt with before. And then bang, it's over. And you don't know if you're going to actually do it again. You never know if you're going to get to direct another film. Just because you directed one film doesn't mean you're going to direct another film. So I kind of, you know, and when you get to a certain age doesn't really matter as much in film directing as it does in sport, but I certainly could identify with what's going to come around the corner next. Is there going to be another tour? Is there going to be another film? Is there going to be another opportunity to do what I need to do in my life? So that's what really grabbed me. So it could have been anybody who's in that crossroads of their life. I just happened to pick the Tour de France in 1998 because it was a scandalous time, and I thought that would make a good backdrop.
That was something else I wanted to ask about, actually, was this thing of being set in the 90s. Like, I just loved all the little details, and it was so weird thinking about the fact that people didn't have mobile phones. I know that sounds really silly, But how much does that change, like the way you have to shoot those scenes? It's like, you know, you have to go to a payphone, or, you know, ringing the ambulance, got to get the phone in the hotel. So was that something else that you had to like work on to get, you know, everything looking just right for that time?
Totally. The obviously, you know, there are obvious things like costume and hairstyles and all that kind of stuff. But actually, the mobile phone was the main thing. And it's funny when you're writing a script, if you take a mobile phone out of it because of a period, it actually makes life a lot easier, because, you know, normally you just say, well, he could just phone her, he could just text her, you could, you know what I mean? That's kind of like the default thing that happens now. But back then that wasn't the case. And she takes out a mobile phone and she holds it. She says, you know, they gave me one of these things, you know, and it's like she doesn't really know how to use it properly, you know. And she gives him a card. There's my numbers on that there, just in case you need it, you know. Anyway, and she puts it away. So yeah, the payphone and hotel phones and all of that stuff, you know, and the payphone with the buttons, it was very particular in Ireland. I think it was the same in the UK. That was a very individualistic thing about that time. And then the music also, music was an important consideration. I mean, we had Boyzone in there, who are ubiquitous with Ireland, and that was a big hit that summer. You couldn't avoid it, and that was the idea of that. He couldn't get away from that bloody song, like, you know. And then I top and tailed it with, in my opinion, a band that kind of encapsulated. This is arguable because a lot of people will say that they think that Happy Mondays are the 90s band, or Stone Roses, but for me, Primal Scream kind of did that for me, you know. And we topped and tailed with Primal Scream, and it just had that kind of macho, Boise kind of attitude to it as well, which encapsulates a team and a band.
And just finally, you know, how does it feel to be putting a film like this out, considering, you know, the pandemic that's happened this year, and, you know, what's happening with the cinema industry? I mean, even watching films like this, just kind of seeing the crowds or small things like that. But there's also that feeling of, you know, it's quite nice to escape and be immersed in a different world when we're all stuck at home. So
yeah, it's to be honest, right, the film has had a, you know, since the pandemic, has had a bit of a checkered history, because we were all set to premiere this film in South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, you know, which would have been an amazing launch pad for the film, particularly in the United States. Like, it's the festival's probably second to like Sundance over there, you know. And we finished mixing the film and finished the film entirely on the 6th of March. And that evening, we got a phone call from the people in South by Southwest saying, sorry, we've got to cancel the festival. And it was a domino effect then. All the festivals got cancelled or went online, you know. So it was soul destroying, to be perfectly honest. However, the light is at the end of the tunnel, Sarah, because here in Ireland, last Monday, should I say, the cinemas opened up again. So the cinemas are open. The film is going into the cinemas next Friday, this day week. And then in the UK, it's going on the 18th. And I think there are some cinemas going to be open in the UK at that time. They're trying to get into the cinemas and get it onto the VOD platform as well, just in case, you know. So yeah, but it is kind of soul destroying, because I didn't make it to be seen in a cinema, and I made it so, you know, you see it on the big screen, all those crowds of people, and that you see them up close with the sweat running down and his muscles flexing, and they were all considerations for cinema, definitely. So I think people have got big TVs now, so maybe it'll be okay.
All right, I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and I really enjoyed the film. It was absolutely brilliant. So,
thank you very much.